Every team, every topic, everywhere. This is Believe.
Ich warte seit Wochen auf diesen Tag und tanz vor Freude über den Asphalt. Als wär's ein Rhythmus, als gäb's ein Lied, das mich immer weiter durch die Straßen zieht. Komm dir entgegen.
Hello and welcome to Gegenpressing, the Bundesliga podcast. I'm Manu he's Stefan Bienkowski. And Stefan, how's it going?
Yeah, very, very well. Long weekend, thanks to Easter. Probably drank too much this weekend. Definitely feels like that. It's a very tricky Monday to get back to work, as I'm sure maybe a lot of our listeners were. But yeah, it was just one of those weekends where we spent a lot of time catch up with some friends, some family. So it was a real 3-day marathon of not wall-to-wall drinking, but drinking on 3 days consecutively, which I don't know. I'm not 21 anymore, put it that way. So very sluggish this morning. I actually think I said to my wife last night that I think I drank more this weekend than I did the 2 weekends before when I was on a stag do, or I guess you'd call it a bachelor party in your part of the world, in Amsterdam. So yeah. That's a little rough around the edges this week, shall we say?
Well, you're gonna hate to hear that. I'm still enjoying my free Monday. Most of the world that celebrates Easter, we get the Friday and the Monday off here. I have to thank the Quebec war government and the Catholics living in that glorious La Belle Province for giving us that day off, because I literally wouldn't care otherwise. But yes, I agree. It's been a really nice 3-day weekend so far, and I'm glad I have the Monday off to recover. The only thing I have to do today is this show, which is great because, it kind of gives you a little bit of focus on the Bundesliga, which, by the way, had some great results this weekend, Stefan, and I think we have plenty to talk about. So we should probably jump right into it after this break.
This episode of the Gegenpressing podcast is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline remains your number one source for all your college basketball betting this season. Get analysis of every play, prop, and point at BetOnline. You'll find the latest odds, bracket contests, team matchups, and game trends at BetOnline. Updated odds for everything from live games, the conference championship, right through the Final Four and championship game. BetOnline is your college basketball headquarters this season. Head to the website today or use the mobile device to sign up and receive 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Be sure to use your promo code BELIEVE, BLEAV, BELIEVE, to receive your bonus. BetOnline.ag, where the game starts.
So yeah, the results, we got almost all of them right. Not really. We were actually catastrophically wrong with most of them because it was so lopsided. The results were crazy up and down. But let's start with one where I actually got the result right. And I think it was the only one this weekend. Union Berlin Dortmund against Union Berlin. One of the two top 4 fixtures that we had this weekend. And Stefan, you watched this game, so I'm just going to hand it over to you.
Yeah, it was a really interesting match. Obviously, going into the game, there was so much that Dortmund kind of had to get right, obviously off the back of two, not just, disappointing results against Bayern and Leipzig, but two really soul-crushing performances. I thought, maybe I'm being harsh, but it's certainly how I felt. I thought Bayern and Leipzig really had Dortmund's number in both of those games. They really brought them down a peg or two. And I think this clash could have really felt like, a moment which could have seen Dortmund's season crumble before our eyes. Terzic actually said before the game that it reminded him of the moment they had just before the World Cup where they lost to, I think, Gladbach and Wolfsburg. And basically everyone was really down on Dortmund, saying, they're a mess, going through another chaotic season, Terzic isn't going to work, back to the drawing board. And then obviously they came back after the World Cup and hit the ground running really well, all guns blazing, and really not projected, kind of, what's the word I'm looking for here? Pushed themselves into a title race, which is where we are now. And I felt like this game was a really good example of why Dortmund are where they are in the league table. Union Berlin, I think if you looked at that result, and maybe even if you watched the highlights on, the YouTube channels, it would have looked like a very close match. Maybe it was in terms of XG, the stats. I haven't actually looked yet, but my impression watching the game was that Dortmund were actually pretty impressive for the most part. They created quite a lot of chances. They maybe even had a penalty at one point. And I think what was really encouraging for Dortmund was for a start, Daniel Malin scored a great goal. And he kind of continues to kind of slowly but surely kind of rebuild reputation at the club. We've kind of seen this different side of him in the second half of the season. He's kind of got his head down. He's working really hard. He comes across in the pitch now to me as this kind of like really hard-working, dynamic forward. He's not really as technically gifted as some other players. Certainly not really, he's not like a speed demon like Adeyemi or Bayern Gittins or even like a Marco Reus or something like that. But he does kind of have a ruggedness to him that I think actually works quite well at times. He's quite happy to get stuck in. And that was kind of the case with the goal in the first half, where a lovely little kind of turn in between two players, and then he managed to really get himself into that back post position. And I don't know, it just kind of I felt like, there's a really good moment in which, obviously, Sebastian Haller had a chance where he kind of scored, he could have scored at the back post. I can't remember if it was the first half or early in the second half. And then, of course, Moukoko came on. But I do feel like we've been kind of talking about Haller for a couple of weeks now, in the sense that, he doesn't look quite 100%, obviously, which is by no means his fault. We do kind of have to keep kind of prefixing that, because really don't want to come across as criticising him. But Dortmund need a goal scorer, and I think Terzic would have not only been delighted by the fact that they managed to pick up 3 points in this really crucial game, but the manner in which they scored both their goals. The first one came from Daniel Malin, who's kind of this now backup player who's been working his socks off. Adeyemi actually played very well as well, but then Moukoko comes on and scores the winner, which was just a sheer stroke of luck, to be perfectly honest with you. If anyone wants to go look at the highlights, they'll know what I mean by that, which was Marco Reus kind of got himself stuck in a cul-de-sac of defenders in front of the Union box, and then an interception happens to fall the way of Moukoko, who scored a really great goal, really important goal. And all of a sudden Dortmund are back on track. And this is kind of what I guess this is kind of where Dortmund are right now. We've kind of talked about this. They're very good at picking up points against teams who are below them in the league. And obviously Union Berlin are a very good team, but they are technically below Dortmund. And Dortmund would be expected to beat them at home. I don't know. I kind of felt myself, and we'll talk about Bayern in a couple of minutes, so I guess this point kind of comes to that. But I did kind of feel myself by the end of this match week thinking that Der Klassiker didn't really change anything. Dortmund kind of slotted back into the team they are. Bayern, to the extent, have kind of slotted back into the team they were before sacking Nagelsmann. But yeah, in terms of Dortmund, big result for them. And yeah, I don't know. What did you think of the game?
Yeah, no, and you mentioned the stats. I have them actually right in front of me here, Stefan. The XG was 2.59 to 0.46. This is via Bundesliga.com, right? They use AWS. I think there's also some other models that can be used, like FlashScore is another one. I think vScout has one as well. So take them with a grain of salt, because everyone seems to come up with a different XG. But if you go by this, I think that tells you quite a lot about the story, doesn't it? This could also have been like a 3-1 game quite easily, or like even maybe a 3-0. So it was a really good performance by Borussia Dortmund. And I think it's a performance that they properly needed to. You look at the responses after the match, whether it was Edin Terzic, Yusufa Moukoko, who of course comes on and scores the winner, right? Which is crucial, I think, for them, because they need to have him fit for this run and for actually to have a chance to maybe take the title away from Bayern Munich, who, in many ways do still seem wobbly at times. We're going to get to talk about them in a moment. But I just thought the responses after this game were really interesting. I didn't watch this game live. I only watched the highlights. But what I did watch, and I always do this, and when the match day ends, I sort of go through the reactions. And there just seems to be a huge sense of relief in Dortmund at the moment, Stefan.
Yeah, because, as we kind of said, this result could have quite easily gone the other way. Well, maybe not the result, because I thought Dortmund played particularly well, but going into the game, you could have quite easily foreseen Union Berlin, at the very least, taking points off Dortmund, and all of a sudden, they're too far behind Bayern, and, all that kind of intrigue and all that sort of, delight that Dortmund were in a title race kind of fizzles out. And I think they're actually now in a pretty interesting position. I think, if I'm not mistaken, 4 of the last 7 games this season are now at home. And they do have a pretty formidable home record. So, I think it would be a really bizarre situation, and we'd have to kind of really dig into the history books to find the last example of this. But I do wonder when the last time Dortmund potentially won a league title without actually beating Bayern in the regular season or in the league itself, because, if you think back to those Jurgen Klopp seasons, the thing that they were obviously very good at is that they had Bayern's number. They really had Bayern running scared. Eventually Bayern kind of managed to overcome that and kind of reclaim the kind of control of the league. But for a good 2 or 3 seasons, the reason that Dortmund were able to win those titles is because they were able to go toe-to-toe with Bayern. But we now find ourselves in a situation, potentially, whereby, Dortmund could arguably still kind of make up the difference with Bayern by going on and beating the rest of the teams that they're expected to beat. Bayern could potentially drop points, and Dortmund could end up lifting the league title, having, lost to Bayern they lost to the first that game, and then they drew obviously early in the season, if I'm not mistaken. But that'd be a very bizarre situation. Of course, I doubt Dortmund fans would really care. They'd be happy to win the league title whichever way they could. But yeah, that's the kind of scenario we find ourselves in, which by no means is a bad thing if you're obviously a Bundesliga fan looking for some kind of last end of season drama.
So I'm looking this up, and I think it was 2001, 2002 that they won the Bundesliga title. And they lost to Bayern Munich in the Allianz, and they drew Bayern Munich at home. And they still ended up winning the title. And they snatched the title away from Bayer Leverkusen on the very last match day. That was, of course, when Leverkusen finished 2nd in the Bundesliga, 2nd in the Pokal, and 2nd in the Champions League. And to make matters worse for poor Michael Ballack, he then also finished 2nd in the World Cup. But yeah, you have to go that far back I'm pretty sure that was the only time that Dortmund won the title without beating Bayern Munich at least once in that season. So there's a precedent. And I think Dortmund actually were in a similar situation that season as well, that they were chasing. I think there was, if I remember this correctly, I have to think back a long time now, of course, right? Because this is 21 years ago. But there were actually 4 teams that could have won the title on the final match day. And I think Dortmund secured it with a draw or win, managed to get it done. But yeah, anyways, there's a precedent digging deep into the history books here, of course. So I think there is still optimism that they're alive. And I think, you can be optimistic, especially when you watch the Bayern Munich game. They, of course, faced Freiburg. And, in some ways, and we had this little bit of a debate, with my dad, actually, of all people, who somehow creeped into our WhatsApp chat. But I actually thought that despite Bayern Munich's dominance on paper, they didn't actually play that good of a game. I mean, it was a really good reaction to them losing in the Pokal to Freiburg, getting the result, getting the 3 wins. And I think Joshua Kimmich's reaction at the end of the match, where he, sort of goes and celebrates in front of the Freiburg fans. And he said afterwards, it's because they actually showed a 10-minute video ahead of the game of Freiburg beating Bayern in the Pokal, kind of as a recap. So maybe that was a mistake in hindsight by SC Freiburg to kind of poke the bear even further. But when you actually look at this entire match, Bayern wasted opportunity after opportunity after opportunity. And I think you actually wrote a newsletter, not just on this match, but on their goal scoring this season, right? But they were also just a Rizzo Doan post away from equalizing that match. And I think if they do, that's the final score. The Bayern Munich did not look like a team that was going to score more than 1 goal, which is crazy considering the stats, but they could have played another 100 minutes and it would have still only been the 1 goal, right? And Matthias de Ligt, and it actually was the chance, it was the least amount of a chance. Matthias de Ligt scores with a beautiful shot from outside the box, out of nowhere, beats his countryman Flecken. But when I looked overall at this match, I actually thought, okay, well, this Bayern side, they still have a wobble or two in them. And if they had drawn this game, I don't think many people would have complained. It's a huge win for them because it keeps them at the top of the table. But I think too, what it kind of highlights and the reaction it highlights, I think the first time in a very, very long time, this Bayern Munich side finds itself in a position in the Bundesliga where they're under real pressure. And I think they're not quite used to it. Like even in that season where their Dortmund were ahead of them by 8 points at one point, you always had the sense that they would just catch up, right? But this year, it kind of feels like this Bayern side is constantly a kettle ready to explode. Because like every game, it's because I feel like every game is a potential drop of points for them. And I think that is a very new situation for them, Stefan.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I thought it was quite telling that after the game, Tuchel, he kind of lamented the fact that, Bayern gave away what he said, an insane amount of chances without converting them. Of course, you look at their XG and they created a number of chances. And I kind of said this in the previous show that I fully expected them to kind of win this game because they did the exact same thing in the Pokal match against Freiburg. It's just one of those things with football that you could play 2 games and maybe have like 20 chances in each game. You'll win one of them 1-0 and you'll lose one of them. So they definitely should have created more chances. But I think the thing that really interests me right now about Bayern is that they're still very much the same team that we saw before Nagelsmann got sacked. Obviously, I think we even kind of talked about this after the Dortmund game. And I'm a real true believer in this when people talk about, the way the players get excited and they get built up and they get themselves really up for games and they find that incentive within themselves. I think sometimes people confuse the fixture and the circumstances of a big game with a head coach providing that kind of incentive, when in fact, I think the mentality of most modern footballers is that if they hear that Champions League music, they're willing to run through brick walls, regardless of the tactics, regardless of the head coach on the sideline. Same with Bayern whenever Dortmund come to town. So I think irrespective of whether Nagelsmann or Tuchel was maybe in the dugout that day, I think Bayern, and especially Thomas Muller, who obviously knows the club inside out, how much this fixture means, was going to work his socks off. But, we then go into these 2 fixtures against Freiburg where we really needed to kind of see Tuchel work his magic. We really needed to see that kind of man management where he can make sure the complacency doesn't creep in. And it didn't work in the Pokal game. And then even after that, Bayern still kind of... I mean, I'm hesitant to say they struggled against Freiburg because they did create so many chances and they just couldn't score. And my newsletter this week is actually on... I think the title of it is the ghost of Robert Lewandowski still haunts Bayern. And I think he does, because if you kind of look at the thing that I found most remarkable when I was doing the research for this article was that Bayern's goals per game in the Bundesliga this season is the exact same to the second decimal point to what it was last season. And actually, if you look at some of their forwards, they've actually got a higher output per 90 minutes of goals and assists per 90 minutes than they did last season. So on paper, Bayern don't miss Robert Lewandowski. On paper, they're scoring just as many goals. They're converting just as many chances. It's not as if their XG has ballooned up and the goals have lagged or anything like that. They're still scoring these chances. But the really intriguing thing to me here is whenever they don't score enough goals, I do feel like the kind of talker in the club is very quick to be like, well, if we had a number 9, if we had Lewandowski, if we had Osimhen, if we had Harry Kane, whatever else, Koulibaly, maybe we would have scored 3 or 4 goals. And I don't think the stats really point to that, to be perfectly honest with you. But I think there's definitely still an issue here where, as you say, they're still far from complacent, still far from consistent, rather. And the really interesting thing, as we talked about kind of Dortmund's run-in, I mean, I actually pulled it up before we kind of moved to this new Bayern, but if we kind of look at Dortmund's lineup, the big teams that they're still to play for the end of the season, so they've got tricky games against Frankfurt, Wolfsburg, and Mainz. They're all at home, which, as we kind of said a moment ago, is where they probably feel most comfortable. But Bayern still have to play Hoffenheim next. They obviously got, who we'll talk about later on the episode, who obviously kind of pulled themselves back together. They got Mainz away. They got Schalke, Leipzig, and Cologne at the end. And I think that Leipzig game at home is going to be really interesting. I mean, Leipzig may find themselves kind of being the kingmakers this season if we're still in the situation where there's only maybe like 2 points between the two clubs, and Dortmund or Bayern lose that game against Leipzig. Then if Dortmund are still in at that point, then all bets are off. So I think Bayern they're in a really interesting situation, and of course we have to talk about this Man City game that's coming up. And I don't know. I think it's going to be really interesting to see how they react to this, because this kind of picks up on what I was talking about in terms of them not really missing Lewandowski. And at the start of the season, I kind of wrote a piece saying that Nagelsmann was trying to kind of build this strikerless formation that would actually work quite well in the Champions League. And while that formation did kind of change, the interesting thing about Bayern this season is that even though they have been quite inconsistent in the league and they've kind of stumbled against kind of very average teams, in the Champions League they've been fantastic. And not just in terms of beating teams like Barcelona and Inter Milan, who on paper are big clubs but are perhaps a little down in the luck right now. Even a very good PSG team, they kind of picked them apart. Found myself very impressed with the way they did that. So I'd be really interested to see how they perform in these two legs against Manchester City, because that really is the ultimate test for this Bayern team. They're coming up against what I think is probably the best team in Europe right now. And if they can get past Man City, then that Champions League's wide open for them.
Potentially. I mean, there's still Real Madrid. Well, I reckon Real Madrid will get past Chelsea, right? Especially now that they're on this second spell with Frank Lampard. I think that's going to hurt them even more. But we all know Real Madrid's history with not only this competition, but also when they play Bayern Munich. So I think taking the Man City hurdle will be a big deal. But I don't think I wouldn't rejoice if I was a Bayern Munich fan, because you have Real Madrid waiting next for you, right? With Carlo Ancelotti and a team that owns this competition. There's really no better way of putting it, right? But we should talk about this Man City game, because I think it's really intriguing. And we've talked a lot about the strikerless formation. And I mean, by the time this comes out, there will be 2 articles dedicated to this, because I wrote a few weeks ago about them going after Harry Kane, right? And I found a lot of the same numbers that you found for your article, which is a bit more into the actual stats of it. In terms of goal scoring, you wonder, like, is the number 9 really missing? And I haven't really looked into that yet, but I think what is missing is that in the Bundesliga, at least, Robert Lewandowski would be the one who, when it is 0-0 against Freiburg, would pop up and score that important winner, right? So while they're like, I think what's the difference a little bit this year is that Bayern Munich are a little bit like a ketchup bottle. Either it all comes out at once or not at all. And that's because they don't have that consistent goal scorer. They have 5 guys that are in double digits, which is more than last year, but they don't have that guy that will just, score 40 to 50 goals a season. It's just, they don't have that in the squad. And I think that is maybe a little bit of the detail that it's missing. And I think it's going to be really fascinating to see what is going to happen in this Man City game, because Man City used to be like Bayern, right? They used to play this almost strikerless formation. Yes, they had Aguero, who's a very consistent goal scorer, but they didn't have a Lewandowski type of striker. And now they have Erling Haaland. And there's been some suggestion that Erling Haaland has kind of made them worse, which I think is ridiculous. But, he does pop up and does score that important 1-0 goal or the 2-0 goal that will put the game away, right? He is there in these moments that matter. We saw it this weekend when he single-handedly sunk Southampton, right? And so I think that it's going to be really fascinating to see how Bayern are going to handle that. Dayot Upamecano, Matthias de Ligt, are they going to be able to handle Erling Haaland? I mean, they did Upamecano at least did last year when he was still with Dortmund. So, they are familiar with him. But I think that is a really big question mark for me. And another question mark for me is, and when are we getting to the point where we just admit that Sadio Mane was what the Germans call ein Fehleinkauf, which is so hard to translate. A wrong transaction, a wrong purchase. It's one of those beautiful compound words that the Germans have, right? Because we are getting to the point now. He looked so lost in that Freiburg game. You know what he reminds me of? He is like the Premier League reverse transaction of Timo Werner. The things that Timo Werner, when he went from the Bundesliga to the Premier League, that Premier League fans were making fun of, like, oh yeah, look, he's like this Bundesliga guy, he's always offside, can't convert chances. Sadio Mane is Timo Werner, but the other way. Because I think he was offside a couple of times against Freiburg. He doesn't really seem to, his run-ins are always off. His chance conversion is terrible. So we're getting to the point now where we're saying, is this one of those games? And I'm pretty sure Tuchel will have to use him because they spend a lot of money on him and they're paying him a huge amount of money as well, right? In terms of salary. Is this a make or break game, maybe even for Sadio Mane and his time at Bayern Munich? Because like, if this doesn't work out and he's going to turn 32 next year, what is his future going to look like?
Yeah, you know what, it's interesting. I was watching that Dortmund game and I was watching Nicolas Sula kind of huff and puff in defence, and I felt like for at least 2 or 3 weeks now that he looks well off the pace. He was at fault for that goal that Union Berlin scored, and I think him and Manny are probably up there for flops of the season right now, which is interesting because when they both made their respective moves, they both seem like really smart moves. The thing with Sadio Mane is that actually, if you look at his numbers, like his XG or no, his goals and assists per 90, they're actually better than they were at Liverpool last season. Problem is that he wasn't scoring enough then and he isn't scoring enough now, and he's come into a team there where he was kind of maybe expected, perhaps unfairly, to be the kind of talisman after Lewandowski left. And yeah, I completely agree with you in terms of how he doesn't really fit this team. If you look at the way his kind of average positioning was in that Freiburg game, he's basically played as a left winger or a left inside forward, and that says to me that he's not a striker. That says to me that he's competing with Serge Gnabry or Kingsley Coman or Leroy Sané for space and for attention. And I don't know. And then, I mean, the way that Tuchel set up that team against Freiburg, you had all of those players and Jamal Musiala, who kind of been slotted in as a kind of pretend central midfielder for Leon Goretzka. And I completely agree with you. I mean, I think Bayern have to kind of maybe stick a twist with Sadio Mane in the sense that maybe this summer they're going to have to make a decision and say, well, you know, is he going to be the guy that we're going to rely on next season, or is it going to be Serge Gnabry, Leroy Sané, Kingsley Coman? Maybe Coman's a bit different because he's much more of a right-sided player, perhaps, but certainly Gnabry and Sané, and actually Matthijs Tel actually quite likes to drift to the left as well. So you basically got 3 players there who play the same sort of position, and it's hard to tell what the club's going to do with them going forwards. But yeah, this is undoubtedly the kind of game. These are the games they bought money for. These are the games they bought the leg for, and Dayo Upamecano. And I do kind of feel going into this match that if I was a Bayern fan, I wouldn't really be too worried about their forward line. I do feel like, and actually the fact that Choupo-Moting's out missing this game might actually be a benefit for them in the sense that, you know, they can go into this match. If I'm not mistaken, the first tie is in England. It is. And I feel like they can go into this away tie without playing a striker. They can kind of play with those kind of 4 kind of attacking players without a striker, and they can really counter with a lot of speed. And you know, the way that we kind of watched them, I think it was against Barcelona where they did that with tremendous effect. And, you know, that might work really well in a sense because Man City are obviously going to try and dominate the game. They're going to try and pin Man City Bayern back if they can. And yeah, you're absolutely right. This is the game that Mane was kind of brought the club to win and to compete in. But having said all that, I do kind of feel like the key battle in this game is going to be like Haaland against Upamecano, because we kind of, I do kind of feel like Upamecano maybe still has nightmares from Haaland at Dortmund, and the way he kind of rolled him over a number of times. I mean, Haaland's record against Bayern was tremendous. He never actually won a game, but he's still scored a bucket load of goals against them. And a large part of that was down to the fact that Upamecano was in defence for Bayern for much of those games. And I mean, I remember it must have been Haaland's last game against Bayern as a Dortmund player, season before. and he was half fit. Dortmund had already kind of lost this presumptuous title challenge, and they basically rocked up to the Allianz Arena, and there wasn't much of a match, wasn't much of a contest, and Haaland kind of wandered around the pitch frustratingly for the whole game. But I have no doubt that he'd be absolutely relishing going into this match against that Bayern defence, because despite the fact that they did score a screamer against Freiburg, I still think there's some question marks over him and Upamecano as a solid defensive pairing. As you kind of said, Freiburg did have their chances in this game, so I'd be more concerned about Bayern's defence going into this game rather than their attack, despite the kind of narrative around the club right now that, maybe they're missing number 9. I actually think they're probably missing David Alaba or Jerome Boateng, or peak Jerome Boateng, a bit more than Lewandowski right now.
Yeah, or maybe Lucas Hernandez was out injured, of course, right? I think he would actually be a perfect player for this fixture, right? Rather, you could pair him with Matthias de Ligt, or you could pair him with Upamecano, right? And I think it would be actually a more solid backline. I'm really curious to see what Thomas Tuchel is going to do. Of course, he is a very pragmatic coach. People always ask, like, what's Thomas Tuchel tactical preference? And I always answer, it's like he doesn't really have one. He looks at his squad and he draws up the best formation. I mean, his time in Chelsea is a perfect example, right? Where he was very defensively minded. And it's not because Tuchel is a very defensively minded coach. It's because he's pragmatic and he saw, okay, this is the best way to achieve something with the squad, was to set him up that way. It had nothing to do with his tactical preference. It was just, that's the only way it was going to work. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see how he's going to set up this Bayern side. And as you said, sort of counter these defensive weaknesses that they have, right? Like, how do you ensure that someone like Upamecano doesn't get rolled over, or Matthias de Ligt has a chance to against Erling Haaland? And I think, that's also why, when we had this debate earlier about all these wingers that Bayern Munich have, that's why Kingsley Coman's name never comes up as one of the players that could potentially leave, because he's so very valuable in defense as well, right? I actually think that he's going to play a very big role in this game. And so, yeah, I think that's, why maybe we can take him out of this entire debate, because he's not only valuable in the attack, but he's also valuable in the defense. And I'm really curious to see if, Tuchel kind of copies what Nagelsmann did against PSG, which I think actually worked really well, right? Until he had to go out injured. But they contained that PSG side really well by using Kingsley Coman as what I described as a two-way player. And maybe that PSG game could actually be a blueprint of how Bayern will approach this fixture. It's going to be hugely fascinating. As I said, that game is on Tuesday. Bayern Munich are actually already in Manchester. They flew this morning, and they're already there to, get ready. And then we're going to have the reaction podcast. Usually we do the transfer show first, and then we do the reaction podcast or the second podcast. But I think this week, the Tuesday show, right after the Tuesday game, we're going to have a reaction podcast on the Man City game, which I think is going to be hugely fascinating and hopefully set the stage for a fantastic return fixture, Stefan. But let's don't dwell too much more on that, because I know the game is tomorrow and people are going to listen to this maybe before the Man City game. But we actually have to look at the other side of the table too. It's not just the title race that's been fascinating this year. The relegation battle, hugely fascinating too. And of course, you had sort of two worlds clashing for the Sunday night fixture. RB Leipzig beating Hertha Berlin. And you know what? I actually thought Hertha looked really good in this match. They lost it, which is, of course, hugely frustrating for them. But at the end of the day, and I think this was actually mentioned by one of our Substack readers, Hertha could actually look at this match day and say, okay, well, if we play like this is something where we can get the results down the stretch and maybe work our way out of the relegation.
Yeah, absolutely. It was 1948 who said, so we asked our paid subscribers for the comments after the match day, and he said, I think Hertha are going to demolish Schalke on Friday, look really good against Leipzig and unlucky not to get any points. And then Mark said something about Stuttgart, which we'll talk about in a moment. But yeah, I completely agree with you. I did manage to catch some of this game, and I found myself quite impressed with just how high Hertha's line was, the way that they were kind of really taking the game to Leipzig. And I completely agree that, they could really, obviously they lost to a decent Leipzig side, but they could really go in to take a lot of confidence from it, and just to kind of transition to that Schalke game to an extent, because, that was my game of the week, and thought it was actually quite an interesting match in the sense that it felt to me like a game in which Schalke just kind of really kind of diminished from the it's almost like they had the limelight shine on them, and they just kind of looked like a rabbit caught in the headlights to an extent. They had a huge amount of their fans actually made the trip to Hoffenheim. I think I saw they maybe had like 10,000 or something fans there. And within 22 minutes, there's an own goal, from Kral, who I thought was pretty poor throughout the match.
Yeah.
But it did kind of strike me this, and obviously Hoffenheim have got a new head coach. They've kind of managed to turn their form around. I think it's now 3 wins in the trot, perhaps, if I'm not mistaken. And then you kind of watch games like this, and you kind of look at those performances, and you say, yeah, of course Hoffenheim shouldn't be anywhere near here, because you look at that team, they've got so many outstanding players, They got Bebe was outstanding up front. You also got Kramaric in the middle of the park. Angelino, I thought, was outstanding. He kind of forced that own goal. And they've got great players from start to finish. And it looked like a game in which, two teams are in a very similar circumstance in the league, but one that had clearly has the individual talent to win key moments in the game, to win the game. And a Schalke team that, huff and puff, but at times have just kind of turned to Salazar and said, right, can you try and win this game for us? And I don't know, it was a really a really difficult game to watch if you're a Schalke fan, I think, because they just didn't really offer anything. And it's quite concerning going forward. I mean, obviously, maybe they'll rely more on their home form and be able to play defensively, but they really got picked apart by Hoffenheim and weren't very impressive at all.
Yeah, no, I actually thought this is probably the most concerning and pivotal match day for Schalke this season. You're quite right that the atmosphere was insane. It was almost felt like a Schalke home game, right? But it is really, really concerning for them, I think, where they are. Like, when you look at the table now, they're back to last place. They have the second worst goal differential after VfL Bochum. And yeah, I mean, that relegation race has gotten really difficult for them now. On 21 points, 5 points behind Bochum. Stuttgart won. Hertha looked better. Hoffenheim kind of like working their way out of that bottom part of the table. Maybe kind of sucking Augsburg and Köln into the relegation battle, right? And I hate this because I want Schalke to stay in the Bundesliga, but it almost feels that this new manager bounce that they had and this like run of form, that was the maximum that we were going to get out of the squad, right? And now that sort of that early euphoria has sort of worn off, you almost sense that, okay, well, is that it? Like, was that it? Is that all the side has to offer? And you almost wonder, yeah, probably. This could be the next 7 match days could be really long for Schalke if they keep playing like that. And,
if you actually look at the games they've got coming up, there's some very clear contrast between the games they can win and the games they can't win. So they've also got Hertha coming up at home next weekend, which is undoubtedly a must-win. Then they play Freiburg, Werder Bremen, and Mainz. Now, there are definitely some winnable games there. I mean, Freiburg away is obviously very difficult, but Werder Bremen at home, that has to be 3 points. Even Mainz away, I know Mainz have been playing very well, but that's a game that they're going to have to go into and try and win, because the last 3 games of the season are Bayern, Frankfurt, and Leipzig. So their season could, the final points they pick up could be like almost a good month before the end of the season. So it's basically never never for Schalke. And I mean, they have done well. I kind of wrote a piece on them a few months ago in terms of how they managed to they went 4 games without conceding a goal. Then they picked up 2 wins, and you kind of thought, here we go. Then they kind of have that comeback in the Riviera Derby against Dortmund. But they've come up against some difficult sides. They picked up a draw against Augsburg, and then they came up against arguably two of the most informed teams in the league right now, in Leverkusen and Hoffenheim. So you can understand maybe why they lost those games. But this this Hertha Berlin game at home, if they can't win that game, they don't deserve to stay in the league. And it's as simple as that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Okay, so Schalke are in trouble. Stuttgart, though, Stefan, have done everything correct by firing Bruno Labbadia and actually signing a good head coach.
Yeah.
I mean, Sebastian Hoeneß, I know it sounds so harsh, but like this was the move that they should have probably done in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
I mean, I've got some comments from some of our listeners here, actually, of our subscribers. I'll just kind of jump in with them. Mark C says, Stuttgart looked good with their new coach and striker coming back from injury. They were 3-1 up and play with confidence to win this do-or-die game. Looks like the bottom may be a real nail-biter and give the boy money for their money. And Mike Reed said, I reckon Stuttgart had the performance of the match day. Winning at Bochum isn't easy. And for Stuttgart to also score 3 goals away from home is very unexpected. And then Mark C says, yeah, we definitely needed that. Obviously a Stuttgart fan. And Mark also said, last 10 minutes was intense after Bochum scored their second goal. I thought on, here we go again. Hopefully this changes their luck and we don't get relegated. And then, of course, someone responded to me saying, I couldn't believe how bad Schalke were by saying, Stuttgart came out strong, but they couldn't hold it together and then just faded. No, sorry, it says Schalke came out strong, held it together and just faded. It helps Stuttgart. So, yeah, some really happy Stuttgart fans in the comment section. And I don't blame them because, don't think either of us really saw this result coming. But, I mean, I guess Stuttgart in a very similar situation to Hoffenheim in a sense, where they do have good players. They just haven't been able to play very well this season. But I don't know, it's going to be really interesting to see how they do because they obviously have Dortmund next at home. And then they play Augsburg, Gladbach, Hertha, and then the last 3 games of Leverkusen, Mainz, and Hoffenheim. So they're actually in a very similar situation to Schalke in the sense that, they've got a Dortmund game, which they're not really expected to win, but then they've got 3 or 4 winnable games before 3 really difficult games. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I didn't actually catch this game. I think you did, so maybe let you kind of jump in and just kind of give your thoughts on it.
Well, let's say they have these 3 winnable games, right? I'm just looking at the table, 23 points. That would get them 32, which is not enough to stay in the league, or historically has not been enough. But yeah, I actually thought I was in the very same situation when Bochum scored that Philipp Hoffmann goal in the 85th minute. I was like, okay, well, here we go. Stuttgart are gonna falter. But at the end of the day, when you actually look at the entire match and the way Stuttgart played this game, you take away the last few minutes. I actually thought that they're very much in control. And you know what? This is now the second game in midweek they won in the Pokal. Yes, it was against Nuremberg, a second division side. Take that with a grain of salt. But at the same time, they now find themselves in a semi-final, right, of the German Cup, where they are playing Frankfurt. And then, just days after that, they win this must-win game against Bochum and put themselves into the driver's seat when you look at the table, right? Because they're now in 16th place, which is the relegation playoff place. And even if they finish in that, considering who could finish 3rd, which could be Heidenheim or St. Pauli in the 2nd division, you look at historically, you're still in a situation where you could possibly stay in the league, right? Even by finishing 16th. And I think they're very much in a position now where they have, they're back in control of their own destiny, which they weren't when Bruno Labbadia was in. Looking at the game and the way it was played, and Goriassi coming back, I think that's really big news for them, right? Because they needed that center forward. That was what they had last year, of course, with Kalajdzic, who did help them down the stretch to stay in the league last year, right? You also don't feel what would have happened if they actually have made the coaching decision that they made now initially. Because Sebastian Hoeneß was available when they went for Bruno Labbadia, which I think a lot of people at the time were, we were really critical about it, and we do get something right every once in a while because we did get this one very right. But you wonder, what would have happened if they had done essentially what Hoffenheim did, right? Hoffenheim went straight for Pellegrino Matarazzo. There was some wobbles in there, of course, but now they're actually looking like a way better structured team. They're looking like, you can tell that Pellegrino Matarazzo is a good coach and that, he's putting his stamp onto the side. Sebastian Hoeneß did it even faster. And you almost wonder, what would have happened if they had made that decision right away, right? And that's hugely frustrating, I think, if I was a VfB Stuttgart fan, I'd be very frustrated by it, but because you sense that you could probably be in a way better situation now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'd be just kind of hoping that if they do go down, that Horace has already signed a deal or made an agreement to stick around, because, with him in charge, you think they would bounce back very quickly. I know that's not the best case scenario for Stuttgart by any means, but the club desperately needs some sort of long-term stability, whether that's in, the Bundesliga or the top division, because there's going to be a huge amount of players moving on this summer, regardless of what division they play in. I think maybe at least 3 key players you're talking about there. So I don't know. It's going to be really interesting to see what happens. I think we have kind of now seen 2 teams who've managed to make really smart managerial changes in Hoffenheim and Stuttgart, who already had squads. Probably they were already too good to be in this position to begin with. I mean, the thing about Schalke is, we can wish them all the will in the world, and we can see, Thomas Reis has come in and put together a really clever defensive structure. But, I mean, we said at the very start of the season, they don't have good enough forwards. In our preview show, we said they were going to struggle because they don't have good forwards. And that continues to be the case. They're in a very different situation from Stuttgart or Hoffenheim. So it'll be interesting to see if the latter 2 can begin to pull away, because they've now got that combo of a good coach and a good squad, whereas the likes of Schalke maybe don't. But we'll just have to wait and see. And luckily, it'll make for a fantastic end to the season.
Yeah, we got excitement still on both ends of the tables. It was match day 27. First and second are apart by 2 points. And then you look at the relegation zone. It's like it starts with Augsburg, right? And maybe you can even put Köln into that. So essentially 12 to 18 for all still in this relegation battle. And even the Europa League Champions League race is now wide open, right? With Leipzig having crawled back into 4th place after Freiburg lost to Bayern. Leverkusen now on 43 points. They're just 5 points behind Leipzig as well. Frankfurt dropping out of the top 6, which, is a little bit surprising. But yeah, this is everywhere around it. If you look at this table, whether it's the title race, whether it's the race for the European spots or the relegation race, everywhere on the table, there's something to play for. And that's just fantastic with 7 games to go. I think we couldn't be in a better position, Stefan.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll maybe just, before we finish up, I'll just read out some more comments from our listeners who, like you said, kind of talk about that. Jack says, Wolfsburg did look up to the contest against Gladbach. Max Arnold was subbed off, which is quite unusual. Unusual instructions from Kovac. Nate says, Leverkusen have been impressive. Xabi Alonso getting that experience before going into Bayern in a few seasons. And then Joe also says the last 15 minutes of Mainz versus Britain match were intense. And there's a few other ones as well, but I can't remember which ones I've already read out, so maybe just leave it there. But as always, it's always great to have the listeners, paying subscribers who get to add that kind of input to the shows. And I think we'll probably do that again for the Bayern game tomorrow night, so we'll definitely keep your eyes peeled. So if you are a paid subscriber to the Substack, do download the app, because it comes with this kind of chat function, and we can kind of drop a message in there, and that's where people can kind of jump in. It's a bit like a forum or a Reddit thread or something. And it means when we kind of do the reaction show tomorrow night to the Bayern game, you guys can get your comments in at full time.
Yeah, and the Substack is back on Twitter, or Tidder, as it's soon going to be called, I guess. So yeah, you can once again link that in there as well. Thank you, Elon. That is much appreciated. But yeah, that's the main show. Huge shout out again to all our subscribers. It's brought to you as always by Bet Online. We'll be back. So the schedule this week is quite simple. We are going to have the reaction show after the Man City game. We're going to have the transfer show on Wednesday. Usually it's the other way around, but because of Champions League, we're going to flip it. And then, of course, the preview show, as always, ahead of the next match day, which will have a Friday game because it's no longer Easter. But yes, thank you once again, everyone, for tuning in, and we'll be back soon. Until then, auf Wiedersehen.
In Sicht.
Thank you for listening to Believe. You can show support to your host by subscribing to the show and giving us a 5-star rating on your preferred platform. Check us out at Believe.com and search for BLEAV on YouTube.